no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. That is a quote by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung, referring to the shadow archetype in humans. If you would like to comprehend how to integrate the shadow into your personality, into your character, in order to avoid it from taking control of you in the future, then listen to this entire video. Alright, so in my previous video, I explained the shadow archetype, which is a subsection of your unconscious, part of your psyche, which wants to sort of sabotage yourself. It is sort of the instinct or the source of dark traits or thought processes and behaviors like a need for vengeance, violence, envy, sexual desires, etc. And it can manifest itself very suddenly under the right circumstances without you knowing of your potential to act out these horrific deeds. Because it is an archetype, it's an instinct, it's part of who you are, it's a reality of human nature, let's say. Now, in order to become, let's say, what some people would call enlightened, which is, it's like, I think metaphorically speaking, it's the absence of suffering, enlightenment, that's what it means. You must, well, if you look at enlightenment, you would think, that seems quite nice. Quite a nice state to be in, the absence of suffering. I think essentially every human wants to be in that state. However, when you sort of see the trajectory towards enlightenment, what the steps needed to get to it, then it starts becoming a little less attractive, let's say. There's Carl Jung in his book Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious maps out this tendency for before every mountaintop, sort of like a goal or a place you want to be, like an enlightened state. The mountain is always preceded by a valley, an abyss, a deep descent. And at first you don't see the descent, you just see the mountain, but as you get closer you realize, oh my god, I need to go all the way down there and then only start going upwards. And that's what it is. In order to reach enlightenment, the first step is to incorporate the shadow in your personality. Understand your deep capacity for producing evil and inflicting pain upon others. And when you understand that's like the first step towards enlightenment, then you understand how it's not really an endeavor that is popularly strived towards. So the first step of incorporating your shadow and the step towards enlightenment is being aware of your resentment. Because I would say resentment is sort of one of the first steps to the production of your shadow, or the manifestation of your shadow. It's like a source. Face the truth of its existence, that it's there. Be aware of it. So practice self-awareness. Observe your thoughts when you start getting dark, and watch the dialogue or the monologue that goes on in your head. Because if people piss you, resentment I think it stems from when you want something but you don't get it, and potentially somebody else gets it but you don't, and then you start getting arrogant about it and resentful, and the outcome of that is then you start developing quite dark thoughts that you would potentially want to hurt this person, or what would you do to this person. These sort of dark fantasies start to arise, and accept that you have these fantasies, that these thoughts exist. Simply accept them, because that's the first step. You need to acknowledge that they are there. And try, and then the next step is try to integrate these fantasies into your personality. So maybe attribute them to who you are, which is probably the next slightly harder step, because nobody wants to attribute evil with themselves. But I think actually in the long term it builds character, because you become aware of your ability to destroy and self-destruct, and that produces a lot of self-respect for yourself if you really comprehend it. Yeah, but so be aware of your resentment and the dark fantasies. Try and incorporate them into your personality, but be aware, because there is a danger in it, and it's a high risk, relatively high risk endeavor. Because I think Nietzsche had a quote, something like, no, I think it was Carl Jung. He said, "If you look into the abyss for too long, the abyss will look back at you." And that's sort of like, if you observe monsters for too long, you may become one yourself, and that may refer to analyzing certain, perhaps Nazi perpetrators in the past, observing their behavior, that if you observe them for too long and too in depth, you might actually become a monster yourself, and that's dangerous, and that's like a warning. So it's not a fun endeavor. It's a challenging one. Yeah. And just to like underline why this is important, well, it's not good to see yourself as harmless. That's not people who are harmless are actually dangerous because they aren't aware of their ability to produce evil, and when they're put in a certain situation where they're resentful, they could just kick off, produce evil, and hurt themselves and a lot of people, and that's not good. That's weak. That's weak, really. And so if we get back to the resentment, what's your resentment? And an important step here is to actually attend yourself then to your resentment. You may be resentful towards someone because they did something, and you want to sort of alleviate that resentment by attending yourself to it. And that may be a good way, is simply talking to the person about how you feel, because you speak the truth, and that takes some sort of burden off your shoulder, and I think it reduces the resentment, because you speak some sort of peace into your mind. And what does it do when you speak to someone? It's therapeutic. I'm not quite sure the psychological mechanism, what goes on, but it's therapeutic. And solve the grudge, before it sort of anchors itself. That's really key, because that's extremely important, because grudges and burdens and resentment can really ruin your life. I think they really burden your soul. And Carl Jung, I believe, also said, like, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So that's a conclusion of how to move towards enlightenment and incorporate the shadow, which is the first step. And that's the descent into the valley before you move up into the heights, into the steps towards closer enlightenment. So that's sort of how you incorporate your shadow. It's be aware of your resentment, incorporate it into your personality, attend yourself to the resentment to try and reduce it, and just be aware of your capacity to produce utter evil. And it's also key to remember, or to try and visualize, how horrific the consequences of your shadow can be. That's also a task which I actually struggle with myself, is you need to sort of really comprehend that manifesting your shadow must by all means be prevented, because it's so terrible, the effect. You really need to sort of visualize it and feel it in your soul, because without it, you won't necessarily convince yourself that you need to avoid your shadow, but you really feel the horrific nature of it and the horrific potential consequence of it. Yeah. So that was my video on how to incorporate the shadow into your personality, which is the first step towards enlightenment, and also the process of individuation, which is coined by Carl Jung. It's the process of becoming whole as a person, which I will also discuss in another video. So thank you for listening.